Welcome back, Capital F football fans, to the O&O Sports YouTube channel. Today, we are looking at Week 12 of this 2025 college football season. As always, be sure to like and subscribe if you do enjoy it, and hit the other O&O Sports social media accounts. Links to those will be in the description below to be entered into the 75 or die giveaway challenge. The rules will be on the screen. Pause if you need to, but basically, if you go down and follow those accounts, like those posts, you get entered into the giveaway, which means you could win up to $100 if I do not predict over 75% of every single college football game correctly this season. And if I do go over that number, you still have a chance at $50. It's literally free money, folks. Go ahead and get entered into that on the other O&O Sports social media accounts down below. And with all that good stuff out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into it, starting with one of the best matchups this week, 24th ranked Pitt versus 10th ranked Notre Dame. Notre Dame is an 11.5 point favorite on the road this week, which means FanDuel has them winning at about 33-21. And Pitt is one of the many teams that could win the ACC this year. They have one of the most fun offenses in the sport, led by Mason Henschel. I believe that's how you pronounce it, Mason Heinschel, something like that. And after starting the season at 2-2, they've won 5 straight conference games to put them in a good spot to potentially make the ACC title game this season. And a lot of that is due, like I said, to Mason Henschel's play. Over 1,600 total yards and 13 touchdowns since he took over as Pitt's starting quarterback this season. And on top of that, Pitt has one of, if not the best all-purpose back in college football in Desmond Reed. Now, he has battled injury this year, but when he does play, 500 scrimmage yards and 4 touchdowns, nearly 100 total yards per game in that aspect. And he averages 15 yards per reception this season. And if he's not one of the best all-purpose backs, he's definitely one of the best receiving backs in the nation. And most importantly, this game is being played at home for Pitt. They are 4-1 at home, much better at home than they are on the road this season, but they are running into an absolute buzzsaw in Notre Dame. They have one of the best offenses. I believe Todd has them as the best offense in football, led by CJ Carr, who's one of the most underrated quarterbacks this season, probably the best running back tandem in the sport. Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price have combined for over 1,800 scrimmage yards and 26 touchdowns. Those two backs are absolutely elite. And like I said, I love that Pitt offense, but Notre Dame's defense has also been borderline great to elite this season. They started off a little bit slow in those first few games, but have allowed just 12 points per game in their last 6 matchups this year. And with that, I do think Pitt is able to make it interesting for a half. It might be like 14-21 at halftime, but in the end, I have Notre Dame pulling away. I have the Fighting Irish winning this matchup 35-20. And next, it is a Big Ten matchup in 19th ranked USC facing 20th ranked Iowa at home. Southern Cal is favored at home by 6.5 points, which means FanDuel has them winning this matchup at about 28-21. And the biggest story of this matchup is it's a home USC game. USC notably much better at home than on the road versus a cockroach pesky Iowa team that just will not die. And the Hawkeyes did let me down last week. I picked them to upset Oregon, and obviously that doesn't end up happening, but they have a chance at redemption this week. We'll get into that in a second, but first, like I said, USC very, very good at home, not very good on the road. Just 10-9 in road games in Lincoln Riley's tenure at USC. But they are staying home this week. Last week, they beat Northwestern by a lot. So they do get the advantage of playing at home this week. But like I said, Iowa is a cockroach. They have a propensity to just hang around in these kinds of matchups. We saw it last week. They were able to hang around and nearly knock off a top 10 opponent in Oregon. But ultimately, Oregon was able to out Iowa in Kinnick Stadium in the rain. And that leads me to the question, can USC do the same thing, and will they have to do the same thing? Obviously, if the offense is firing on all cylinders, I don't think they necessarily will have to. But the biggest thing is, will they be able to? This offense has lived and died by how efficient Mekhi Lemon has been. He's easily Jaden Mayava's favorite target on offense. And we've seen in games this year, when you're able to take Mekhi Lemon out of the ball game, USC's offense tends to struggle, and we've seen that the last few weeks against Notre Dame, Nebraska, and Northwestern. The game plan is to get Mekhi Lemon out of the game, force Maiava to find his other receivers or use his legs and beat you that way. Versus Notre Dame, we saw the Fighting Irish successfully abuse that matchup, and they end up winning that game. And then against Nebraska, again, we see them successfully abuse that matchup, but ultimately USC was able to find success on the ground and beat Nebraska that way. But that brings me to another great point, that this is Iowa. They're going to be able to win on the ground and not let you win on the ground. Typically, that is. Oregon did do a very good job at adjusting last week. And I do think Iowa can effectively take Lemon out of this matchup and force the Trojans to win on the ground with Maiava and with their running backs. And I don't think they're going to be successful in doing so. We saw it work against Nebraska, but Nebraska's rush defense hasn't been very good at all this year, whereas Iowa's has been really, really good. And likewise, I don't think Maiava is able to hurt them to the extent that he necessarily would need to in order to give it a clear advantage in this matchup. And once again this week, I am taking Iowa in the upset. Give me the Hawkeyes to beat the Trojans 23-21. And next, let's jump back to the SEC to talk about 4th ranked Alabama taking on 12th ranked Oklahoma at home. Alabama is a 5.5 point favorite, which means FanDuel has them winning at about 26-20. And both of these teams are coming off of huge wins. Oklahoma obviously coming off a bye more recently, but before that, they get a huge upset win in Neyland Stadium over Tennessee. And on the other side, Alabama put the Frank Wilson Flame out against LSU last week, held them to just 9 points and ended up winning that game 20-9. And this week, it is strength on strength, Alabama's offense versus Oklahoma's defense. Who will win in that battle? For Alabama, they're not flashy, they're very systematic, very efficient, but they have shown that they can hit home runs this year. They're not Iowa's offense like we just talked about. They're not going to gut punch you all game. They can absolutely hit that knockout blow, but Oklahoma is going to force the issue in this one. They're not going to let you just run it down their throats all game. They're going to force Ty Simpson to drop back in this matchup, and when he does so, they are elite at getting home, getting pressure on the quarterback. 4 sacks per game this year, which is first in the country. And while I do absolutely love Alabama all around, this is going to be the biggest test for a quarterback like Ty Simpson, who has been able to live off the run this year. The run game has been very successful all year long, which has allowed Ty Simpson to get open looks, win in the intermediate, and every once in a while hit the home run, like I said. But I would ask you to look all the way back at week 1, and I know Florida State is terrible now somehow. I don't understand how that happened. But Florida State did a great job at limiting the Alabama run, which forced the issue with Ty Simpson, and he did not have a good game at all. Something similar could happen in this matchup if the Crimson Tide are not careful here. This is absolutely a championship roster, a championship caliber team overall, but they have to win this matchup. They have to prove that they can take on an elite defense like this, take the blows, and really be able to succeed nonetheless if they want to win a national championship this year. And I do think they end up winning, but I do not necessarily think it is because of the offense. That Alabama defense is also very, very solid. I know we haven't gone over them in this, but likewise, I don't like Oklahoma's offense nearly as much as I do Alabama's this year. They are very one-dimensional. Post John Mateer hand surgery hasn't looked the same, at least as a passer. He's been able to run a little bit, but I do not think the Oklahoma offense is going to be able to be as successful on the ground as they would be if John Mateer's hand was in perfect condition. And ultimately, I have Alabama winning this matchup 24-17. And next, it is Duke taking on 14th ranked Virginia at home. And somehow, someway, Virginia is a 6.5 point dog on the road versus Duke. That means FanDuel has Duke winning at about 33-27. And this might just be the hardest prediction of this week. Not because of matchups necessarily, not because both of these teams match up well against each other. It's just because both of these teams have been almost impossible to predict this year. Duke is 5-4, and they're coming off a loss to UConn on the road. Now, UConn is a solid team. Don't want to discredit them, but I mean, it's Duke and it's UConn. There should be a winner in that game, and it shouldn't be UConn. And somehow that team that lost to UConn not 5 weeks ago, not at the beginning of the season, not in week 0, last week they lost to UConn, is favored against a top 15 ranked Virginia. And now not only that, but Duke is 4-1 in conference play, which means if they win this matchup and if they win the next two matchups after that, they could very well make the ACC title game at 8-4. What a disaster scenario that would be for the ACC. And this game overall summarizes the ACC as a whole. No clear favorite. When you think one team is taking an advantage, they kind of fumble it away, and really there's not much to say for the ACC. But in this game, I think it will come down to exactly two things: which defense performs better and which quarterback can do a better job at just holding on to the football. And that leads me to believe that Virginia is going to win this game. I have the Cavaliers winning 34-31, and I am a big fan of Darian Mensah, Duke's quarterback, and I was very high on Duke's offense coming into the season, but they've shown at times this year that they can be a complete disaster with turnovers. And at its peak, I like Duke's offense and probably Duke overall more than Virginia, but Virginia has been more consistent. Virginia has been less likely to turn the ball over, and Virginia has been a lot better defensively than Duke, which is a big surprise. And I could very well see Duke win this matchup if they put it all together and if they aren't clumsy with the football, but I have to trust Virginia's consistency over Duke's explosivity. And last this week, we have to jump back to the SEC to look at 6th ranked Georgia taking on the 11th ranked Texas Longhorns. Georgia is a 6.5 point favorite, which means FanDuel has them winning at about 27-21. And I think this game will either be absolute cinema or absolute domination. There's no in between really. And I say that because Texas overall has been very, very hot and cold this year. Their two biggest problems overall have been the inability to establish the run and of course Arch Manning's inconsistencies. But over the past couple of weeks, one of those has at least gotten a lot better, and it is not the run. They are still very, very bad at running the football. Just 3.9 yards per rush attempt, which is 88th overall. And the story of the season for the Longhorns is teams being able to lock in on the run and force Arch Manning to pass, which he hasn't been great at this season, except for the last 2 weeks. He's really come into his own, 70% passing for 684 total yards and 7 total touchdowns. That looks a lot more like the Arch Manning I thought we would see coming into this season. And that leads me to my biggest question of this matchup and of this video really is, will Arch Manning be able to continue that hot streak? And I'd honestly answer with yes. Georgia is just 50th in opponent yards per pass attempt, around the same in opponent completion percentage, 50th in the country. And on top of that, they are 128th in sack percentage this year. They do not get pressure on the quarterback at a very good rate at all. And that specifically is weakness on weakness. Georgia not been good at getting home versus the quarterback, but Texas's offensive line has not been able to protect Arch Manning at a very good rate at all this year. And there is absolutely shootout potential if Georgia, like I said, cannot get home against this Texas offensive line. If they are able to get Arch Manning on the ground a couple times in this one, I like Georgia by double digits, but I don't really think that's going to happen. I think Texas's offensive line has a solid game here, allows Arch Manning to open up, but I like Georgia's offense way more than I do Texas's. I think the Georgia run will be able to be very effective in this one, and I think Gunnar Stockton is able to make a few big plays, and I do have the Georgia Bulldogs winning this matchup 35-30. And with that, thank you for watching. As always, be sure to like and subscribe if you did enjoy it. Hit the other Ono Sports social media accounts to be entered into the 75 or die giveaway. Like I said, free money, folks. Take advantage of it. Have a great week of football watching, folks, and I will see you in the next one.